Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe for this Wednesday, the 22nd of January in London. Coming up today.
Keep borrowing and carry on. The UK budget deficit soars by more than forecast as debt costs rise.
It's tight. Rachel Reeves concedes that she has left herself with little room for manoeuvre in an exclusive Bloomberg interview.
In the firing line, Trump threatens China with 10% tariffs and warns the EU could be next.
Going interstellar, the new US president launches Project Stargate, a potential $500 billion plan to fund US AI infrastructure.
To the top stories of the day then. UK government borrowing increased more than forecast in December due to the cost of servicing inflation-linked debt. The budget deficit totalled £17.8 billion last month. That's more than double the figure from a year earlier. The figures highlight the fiscal challenges facing Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Speaking exclusively to Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, after the figures were released, Reeves says she has stabilised the fiscal situation.
In the final year of the forecast, there's a £9.9 billion amount of headroom. That is more headroom than we inherited from the previous government. We actually put more money into increasing
theirs was a famously small amount as well.
Yeah, so it's tight. And those fiscal rules are important to us because they are the sort of bedrock and foundation of that stability that I've spoken about.
Reeves's comments come as city economists told Bloomberg that pushing back government spending cuts to restore her fiscal headroom could drive borrowing costs higher. At the budget in October, Reeves was deemed to have just £9.9 billion of headroom, but that has likely been wiped out by the rise in government borrowing costs earlier this month.
Well, the challenge facing the UK economy comes as Rachel Reeves sets out to appeal to international investors at the World Economic Forum in Davos. The Chancellor has meetings scheduled with the CEOs of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, and Goldman Sachs' David Solomon. The Barclays CEO, CS Venkatakrishnan, told Bloomberg that his outlook for the UK is positive.
I am very confident in the UK. I think the basic structure of the economy, the skill set that's there in the UK, soft and hard, is very strong, very conducive to growth. I think the new government, and it's only 6 months old, has put together a plan which they need to implement, and they need to implement quickly, but has shown all the right signs about supporting business, supporting the financial sector, and supporting the other important sectors in the UK.
Barclays CS Venkatakrishnan there speaking to Bloomberg. This was after shares in UK lenders soared on Tuesday when the Chancellor sought to intervene in a pivotal Supreme Court case about historic practices in banks' motor finance businesses.
Now, the latest comments from the CEO of Barclays and Chancellor Rachel Reeves come as it emerged that the UK government has ousted the chair of its Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, Marcus Bockering, in a bid to show the business world that it's serious about economic growth. Bloomberg was told ministers had been underwhelmed by the CMA's proposals to deregulate. James Woolcock has the story.
There's a new villain in Westminster. Government ministers have been calling on regulators to give businesses more leeway for months. Now, frustrated with the response, they've decided heads must roll. It's a clear signal from the UK government. It wants to be seen as pro-business and wants to boost the economy. But will a new face at the regulator drive new policy? In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
Well, the UK's renewed focus on attracting overseas investment comes as Donald Trump says that he is still considering imposing across-the-board tariffs on Chinese imports. Speaking at an event at the White House, the newly installed US president said that they could come as soon as next month. Trump also singled out the European Union during that same press conference, saying that the bloc will be in for tariffs.
So, it's not just China. China's an abuser, but the European Union is very, very bad to us. They treat us very, very badly. They don't take our cars. They don't take our cars at all. They don't take our farm products, essentially. They don't take very much. We have a $350 billion deficit with the European Union. They treat us very, very badly.
President Trump's comments come as the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen used the speech in Davos to warn of a new era of harsh geostrategic competition, a possible reference to the US president's return.
Well, Donald Trump has, meanwhile, announced a US joint venture with SoftBank, OpenAI and Oracle to fund the expansion of AI infrastructure. Dubbed Stargate, the project will deploy $100 billion immediately. That's the quote, at least, with plans to increase that to at least $500 billion. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman announced the venture next to the president.
I'm thrilled we get to do this in the United States of America. I think this will be the most important project of this era. And as Masa said, for AGI to get built here, to create hundreds of thousands of jobs, to create a new industry centered here. We wouldn't be able to do this without you, Mr. President. And I'm thrilled that we get to. I think it'll be an exciting project. I think we'll be able to do all of the wonderful things that these guys talked about. But the fact that we get to do this in the United States is I think, wonderful.
Altman's company, OpenAI, will oversee operations. Initial equity will come from SoftBank, OpenAI, Oracle and Abu Dhabi state investor MGX, with a build-out of the first computing system starting in Texas. The announcement comes after Trump rescinded Biden's sweeping executive order on AI, halting the implementation of key safety and transparency requirements for AI developers.
Amid the slew of announcements, the president also discussed the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Trump said that he would probably impose sanctions on Russia if Vladimir Putin does not come to the table to negotiate. The news comes as Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky praised Trump's ambition to expand US energy exports.
Right now, things are on our side. President Trump is going to export more energy, but Europe needs to step up and do more long-term work to secure real energy independence. You can't keep buying gas from Moscow while also expecting security guarantees, help and backup from the Americans. That's just wrong.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky speaking there at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos. He went on to refer to the US as an indispensable ally and called on Europe to become more self-reliant and to develop its own industry. Now, in a moment, we're going to delve into all of the announcements that are being made by President Donald Trump. Jenny Leonard, who is our White House correspondent, is going to join us. Why? Because she's on European time, which is really exciting. She's in Davos, so that'll be in just a moment. But also, in the last hour, we just had a half-hour sit-down between John Micklethwaite and the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds. They talked about a lot of issues. They've been defending their decisions, the decisions that were made in the budget, and also laying out their plans for growth. Our UK correspondent Lizzie Burden was watching that, listening in. It was a really good conversation, wasn't it? Of course, John Micklethwaite, interviewed President Donald Trump when he was president-elect. Now he gets to grill the Chancellor. Very different context for Davos compared to the last time that Rachel Reeves was there when she was Shadow Chancellor. Now she, has a 6-month record, perhaps a 6-month record to defend.
Indeed, Caroline. Things were so different the last time Reeves was at Davos alongside Keir Starmer. Labour wasn't in government, Trump wasn't in the White House. And since then, of course, she's whacked business with these tax hikes in the October budget. So in surveys and behind the scenes, there is this sense of disappointment in what she promised business, this smoked salmon and scrambled eggs offensive becoming reality. And that's interesting to contrast with all the CEOs kind of flanking Donald Trump at his inauguration. So we'll have to see whether that closeness continues in the US. But in this interview, this fireside chat with Reeves and Reynolds, she was standing by that budget. She said she's not going to apologise for it. The difficult decisions were necessary. Yes, her instinct down the line is to have lower taxes and less regulation, but that's down the line in the future. I heard you there playing the defence of Reeves from the Barclays CEO, but you heard his emphasis. Yes, they have a plan. They need to implement it quickly. And that really echoes the frustration at home. Yes, there's a long-term plan, but the issues really are in the short term, as we have seen in the market turmoil of recent weeks. Talking of which, we had a reminder today, didn't we, Lizzie, of the fiscal constraints again for this UK government, this UK economy. What stood out to you in terms of the questioning on the fiscal challenge that faces this Chancellor in terms of her response and whether or not it's going to assuage and convince investors? Yeah, the latest data this morning on the public finances showed the budget deficit came in at £17.8 billion in December, so overshooting that estimate of £14.2 billion. Yes, as I say, gilt yields have steadied since the market turmoil recently, but there's still so many questions about Reeves's fiscal plans if her headroom is wiped out in March when the Office for Budget Responsibility, the fiscal watchdog, makes its assessment. So John Micklethwaite asked her about how little headroom she left herself in the budget. Again, she came back to this defence that the Tories left less than she did. She said that her fiscal rules are important to her. So he put her on the spot. He said, are you going to have to change your fiscal plans if we get another incident like this? He compared it to if you're on a bike riding close to the curb, but she said she doesn't want to get ahead of the forecast. Now, that might not be enough for investors. When we speak to them, they say the gilt market wants austerity. The spending cuts can't come in 3, 4, 5 years' time. Otherwise, it's just like moving numbers on a page. It's not going to have credibility. But Reeves here not going to give any clues on that. Look, growth is the message that she wanted to hammer home, that it's the number one mission of the government. John put to her the chances when you have to pick between the two. Heathrow's third runway, for example, her response was that growth is the top mission. So a strong what side she lands on in that debate. Then there's the CMA question, the Competition and Markets Authority, regulation versus risk. She says that the ex-chair understood they needed to pick. He understood the need to regulate for risk, but growth as well. And then finally, it kind of put them in check because there's the question of growth over everything. What about the EU? And all we could really hear there from Reeves and Reynolds was we want a reset of the relationship between the EU and the UK. So really not giving a lot of answers there.
OK, UK correspondent Lizzie Burden. Yeah, one of the liveliest moments was the conversation about infrastructure. This is a Chancellor who's very restrained in terms of her delivery. And on that part of the conversation, she really seemed to kind of come to life, saying, look, we've said no too many times to building infrastructure in the UK. It's time to pull the trigger on some of these projects. And you felt that was coming from the heart, from the Chancellor on that particular question. UK correspondent Lizzie Burden on the interview, of course, between John Micklethwaite and the UK Chancellor.
Meanwhile, we are 2 days into President Donald Trump. He initially focused on tariffs against Canada and Mexico, but then discussed 10% tariffs on all Chinese imports at the start of February, plus this big AI infrastructure investment package. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Jenny Leonard, our White House correspondent, who joins us this morning live from Davos. Jenny, we're delighted to have you, not often on European hours, so it's great to speak to you, especially right at the beginning of this second Trump presidency. What's coming down the track on tariffs, do you think, and when?
Yeah, it's nice to be with you too in European time. Well, I think if we take President Trump at his word, we'll see a slew of tariffs on February 1st, which obviously is in 10 days. He promised 10% on China yesterday, and before that, a day before, he promised 25% on Mexico and Canada. Obviously, that is not really backed up by, let's say, staff being in the building. None of his economic team is confirmed, the ones that need Senate confirmation. And of course, he signed a very broad executive order that was giving his entire cabinet until April 1st to study every single trade relationship the U.S. has with any partner in the world. So the February 1st thing might undercut this, but if you've been watching and listening to Donald Trump over the last 8 years, I would say, he comes out of the gate with a negotiating ploy. So he starts strong and wants countries to respond by February 1st, the ones that he specifically listed, to come to the table and give him something creative that, he might be able to work with to say, you know what, I actually could hold off for a couple more weeks and see if we can work something out. We've seen this in the first term. I would not be surprised if we see this again in the second term and we don't see tariffs for another couple weeks and February 1st kind of comes and goes. But I would not bet money on one scenario or the other.
Yeah, and Jenny, look, you've obviously followed him for a significant period of time, and anyone who's kind of monitored his comments over the last 8 years from the European perspective, kind of pricks up their ears when he talks about the EU, because it really seems to animate this president, his gripes against Europe, against countries like Germany, of course, with that export machine. What does he want from Europe, do you think?
Yeah, good question. I think For Europe, it's a little bit difficult because I think Trump loves dealing with countries one-on-one. I think he believes his negotiating strength is much stronger there than having the combined power of the EU work together. And obviously that also slows down the EU in dealing with him. And there's, they're not a monolith. They all have different opinions too. I think what might be able to go a long way is if he sees a little bit more defense spending or commitments on that front. I think he also, as we've seen yesterday in his big announcement on the AI infrastructure, he doesn't just negotiate with countries, he also negotiates with companies. So there might be European companies that could be able to sway him in a way by saying, hey, we see this opportunity to invest in the United States because, as you've heard him say, if you come to the U.S., you are able to avert tariffs for your company. So I think the wheeling and dealing for the Europeans has to be a little bit more creative than they might, be used to dealing with from Brussels to Washington. And Trump really likes to divide and conquer. So that's how we see him, inviting Giorgia Meloni or Viktor Orban to Mar-a-Lago. But we haven't really seen any of the other leaders go down there or have a real in to his team. So it'll be interesting to see how the Europeans sort of play this. And I think the other thing that really may be helpful is to see them move on China. The Trump team seems convinced that the Europeans are not willing to stand up to Beijing. And for Trump, it's obviously the pendulum swings. Sometimes he's best friends with Xi Jinping. Sometimes he really wants to tariff them in every single product. But I think for the Europeans to sort of actually put something down on paper and say, we will work with you on something specific on the China front could go a long way. So it might be something they want to try.
Yeah, and I think also the kind of explosive aggressiveness of some of the Trump statements, though, is already moving the needle kind of more quickly than it did in his first term. And just listen to Bloomberg's interview with the German finance minister this morning in Davos, where you are, UKEU, is talking about, how Europe should think before retaliation against any potential Trump tariffs, that maybe there would be scope for discussions, is what UKEU has told us. I just wonder, given, as you say, so many people are trying to sort of tap into this new administration and get close to President Trump, what people are asking you as a White House correspondent. What do people ask you about, as they react in Davos and elsewhere to this new president?
Yeah, I think everyone's trying to read the crystal ball and figure out if Trump's is serious about what he says and the deadlines he throws out. I think the answer to that is everyone should stay on their toes and take him at his word when you can, because he has acted on stuff before. I think the other question that people have is, the parallels to the first administration, when we see, him promising tariffs across the board, him promising large tariffs on China, and then on day one, he obviously didn't implement them. He promised them now for February 1st, but who knows if they will actually come. There is a very big divide internally inside his economic team on what to do on tariffs, when to do it, how broad to go, if you should really use them, on what industries. And so I think that's a big parallel to the first administration, where we saw, it really almost sometimes spill out in the open with Steven Mnuchin and Peter Navarro sort of fighting in front of foreign delegations. And then the other thing that's a wild card, and we don't know how much longer that is going to be a big part of this administration or policymaking, is Elon Musk. He's came into the White House on day one. He had an email set up. He has an office in the White House now. So he obviously could be adding to the instability by being the last person in the room with Trump. We just don't know if he is and how often he is. And that could really sway the policy outcome. So buckle up.
Yeah,
it's going to be...
You have to wonder whether Beijing, there's some aspiration in Beijing. You would have thought that maybe Musk can be something of a Trump whisperer for them, given his business operations in China, maybe even a role with TikTok. Jenny, before we let you go, do you think it's realistic for the UK to be able to carve a kind of middle path when it comes to relationships with the US? Clearly, this is a government that is not ideologically aligned with the Trump administration. But given that we have a trade deficit, not a surplus, given we have the royal family, is there a way for the UK to improve relations, to build on that? How vulnerable or exposed do you think we are?
I think there definitely is a way. And going back to even just what I said earlier, the UK has a lot of opportunities to deal with Trump by not having the EU tied to it. So I think the UK has, maybe of all the countries, the best chances. And I'm really interested to see how that plays out.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.